The year is 1879. The British Empire is the most powerful military force on Earth. Professional soldiers, the most advanced rifle in the world, artillery, cavalry. They have never lost a major battle to an African force. Not once. On January 22nd of that year, at a place called Isandlwana, a Zulu army met a British column in the open field. By the end of that afternoon, over 1,300 British soldiers were dead. It remains, to this day, the worst defeat the British Army has ever suffered against an indigenous force, anywhere, ever. But that battle, and what made it possible, was buried, deliberately. Because to explain how it happened would have required Britain to admit something their entire empire was built to prevent people from believing. That the men they faced were not primitive. They were built, rebuilt, deliberately, over years, into something that has no modern equivalent. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to take you inside that process. Not the battle, not the spears, not the tactics, though all of that is here too. I'm going to show you what happened to a boy's body and mind and spirit year by year, from the moment he entered the Zulu warrior system to the moment he stood in a valley with 19,000 other men and waited, completely still, for the signal to move. And I'm going to end with a question about human beings that I cannot answer for you. Only you can answer it. Stay to the end, because the last thing you hear is the thing that changes how you see everything that came before it. To understand what was built here, you first need to understand what already existed. Before the Zulu kingdom, the Nguni people of southeastern Africa were farmers and cattle herders, not a warrior culture, not an empire. Dozens of small chiefdoms spread across the land, separated by rivers and hills, occasionally raiding each other over cattle. But their idea of war was closer to what we might call a formal argument. You fought until someone gave in, then you stopped, you went home. Casualties were low, life continued. These were not people without culture or sophistication. They had complex social structures, deep spiritual lives, and a relationship with the land that had been refined over generations. They had cattle, which in their world meant what money means in ours. They had ceremonies, rituals, an understanding of the cosmos. And they had a concept of what made a man a man. You owned cattle, you married, you started a family, you became a full human being. Keep that in your mind, because one man was about to take everything that defined a full human being and weaponize the longing for it.
Shaka Kasenzanga Kona was born into that world and then thrown out of it. His father was a chief. His mother was not the right woman. In the rigid social world of the Nguni, that made Shaka illegitimate. And illegitimacy was not just a social inconvenience. It meant he was no one, landless, cattleless, belonging to nothing. He and his mother, Nandi, were expelled. They wandered between clans, relying on distant relatives and the mercy of strangers. Other children mocked him for his name, which meant intestinal parasite, a slur his enemies had attached to his birth, for having no father's homestead, for being nothing. He grew up watching the world the way only outsiders can, studying how belonging worked, what power required, what made men follow, and what made men break. And one idea formed in him that would change the history of an entire continent. If you take from a man everything that makes him a civilian, his cattle, his marriage, his family, his name, his individual identity, and replace it with something collective, something larger, something eternal, what do you get? You get a man who has nothing left to protect except the mission, and a man with nothing left to protect except what he believes in is the most dangerous thing alive. Shaka didn't invent a training system. He turned his own trauma into a blueprint. Keep that in mind. It becomes the most important part of this story.
Most documentaries describe the Ibutho, the Zulu warrior regiment, as a training program. Think of it more as a surgery. You went in as one person, a different person came out. It began when you were somewhere between 14 and 18 years old enough for your body to handle what was coming, young enough for your identity to still be malleable. The first thing they took was your name. Not given a number, not given a rank, your name was replaced by the regiment's name. You were no longer Sipo from the Nutili clan. You were a Nokenke, an Usutu, an Indlundlo. Your first loyalty was not to your family anymore. It was to this regiment, and through this regiment, to the king. The second thing they took was your sandals. That seems small. It was not. The terrain of KwaZulu-Natal, the land these men would run, fight, and eventually die on, is beautiful and brutal. Basalt rock, thorn acacia, rivers of shifting stone. Running this without shoes every single day for years does something to the body that goes much deeper than toughening the soles. What actually happens? In plain terms, when your feet experience pain repeatedly in the same environment, your brain eventually stops filing that sensation under danger. It reclassifies it. Instead of, warning, you are being hurt, the signal becomes, this is normal, you are home. Scientists call this somatosensory adaptation. The warriors weren't ignoring the pain. Their brains had genuinely changed what the pain meant. On home soil, in their land, their nervous systems were at rest, even while running 50 miles. What this produced over years was a warrior whose body was physiologically at ease on the very ground where he would fight. His land was not a battlefield to him, it was home. And fighting at home, when every rock and ridge and river crossing is familiar, is a different experience entirely. Accounts from British military observers, men who tracked Zulu army movements during the 1879 war, documented something they could not fully believe. Zulu impis, warrior forces, routinely covered 50 miles in a single day, and then they fought. A modern marathon is 26 miles. Elite athletes train for years to run one, and then they rest for days. The Zulu ran twice that distance across broken terrain without shoes, with minimal food, and arrived ready to execute complex tactical maneuvers. But here is the part most people miss entirely about this. The runs were not competitive. They were not individual. The whole regiment ran together. The fastest man did not pull ahead. He stayed with the slowest man. And this, a detail that seems like simple discipline, turns out to be one of the most psychologically powerful things you can do to a group of human beings. Why synchronized movement changes your brain. When a group of people move their bodies in unison, same rhythm, same pace, same breath, something measurable happens. Pain tolerance increases, fear responses decrease, a sense of identity expands beyond the individual self and into the group. This isn't mystical, it's documented in modern sports psychology and military research. The Zulu discovered it centuries before the research caught up. Running together didn't just build fitness, it built a collective nervous system. 50 men who breathe together, suffer together, move together, they stop thinking as 50 individuals. They begin to think as one thing.
Food was controlled, not withheld. The system needed strong, functional bodies, but controlled, never quite enough, always aware of the absence. And sleep was disrupted. Training continued into the night. Rest was unpredictable, earned, inconsistent. This is where the modern viewer might say, that is just cruelty. But here is what the research and centuries of military experience actually shows. What hunger and sleep disruption actually do over time. In the short term, both are genuinely miserable. In the medium term, something counterintuitive happens. The body stops treating mild hunger as an emergency. The mind stops catastrophizing about discomfort. The nervous system adapts to unpredictability.
Elite military units around the world, Navy SEALs, the SAS, Spetsnaz, use precisely this combination in selection courses. They're not trying to break recruits, they're trying to find the men whose minds can recalibrate. Men who can function when everything is uncomfortable. The Zulu Ibutho ran this protocol not for weeks, but continuously across years of a young man's most neurologically formative period. By the time a Zulu warrior had been through this for several years, uncomfortable was simply his baseline. He didn't push through hardship. Hardship had stopped registering as hardship. But everything I've told you so far is just the physical layer. There is another layer underneath it, and it is the layer that British generals found genuinely impossible to understand. That comes next. Every culture in history has had to solve the same problem. Human beings are afraid of death. It is built into us, deep in the most ancient part of our brain. If you want to build an army, you have to find some way to override that. Most military traditions try to make death seem glorious. Die for the king, die for the cause, die for honor, go to paradise. The appeal to glory works, but it has a ceiling. When the fear is strong enough, glory stops being enough. The Zulu system did something different, something more complete. They didn't make death seem glorious, they changed what death meant entirely. In the Zulu world, and I want you to follow me here carefully, because this only works if you take it seriously as a coherent system of belief, not as superstition. The dead were not gone. The Amadlozi, the ancestral spirits, were active participants in the world of the living. They watched, they protected, they could intervene. A warrior who died with courage did not stop existing, he graduated. He became a force that his living brothers could call on. A warrior who died in cowardice or who refused to fight did not rest. He became an uneasy, troubled spirit that brought misfortune to his family for generations. Think about what that means for a moment. In plain human terms, in most cultures, a soldier faces this choice: risk death or face shame. That is a serious weight, but shame is survivable. You can live with shame. In the Zulu spiritual world, the choice was die courageously and remain present, powerful and protective to everyone you love, or survive through cowardice and become a curse on your own family's future. The stakes were not between your life and your death. The stakes were between your family's blessing and your family's suffering. That is not a calculation most human minds can override with self-preservation instinct.
The Isigodi, the regiment barracks, was not a military base. It was understood to be a threshold, a place between worlds. When a young man entered the Isigodi, the community around him performed rituals of mourning for his civilian self, not metaphorical mourning, actual grief. The boy who had walked in was understood to be dead. What would emerge after years of transformation was not that boy. It was a warrior, a new identity built from the ground up. And this matters enormously because of what it does to a young person's psychology. Why you are dead is a more powerful message than you are brave. When a society tells a young man he is brave, he carries that label alongside everything else he is, his fears, his desires, his self-preservation instincts. The label can be contradicted by experience. Brave men can still feel afraid. But when a society tells a young man he is already dead, that his old self, with its individual fears, is gone, the calculus changes completely. Dead men do not fear death. The warrior who believed himself to have already crossed the threshold of death operated from a fundamentally different psychological starting point than any soldier who was merely told he was courageous. Before any significant battle, Zulu warriors underwent a ritual preparation called Umuthi.
The English translation is medicine, but that word carries the wrong connotations entirely. Umuthi before battle was administered by the Isandlwana, the spiritual practitioner, and its purpose was understood with absolute seriousness by every man who received it. It made the warrior's body impervious. It called the ancestors directly into the regiment. It disrupted the enemy's spiritual protection. Scientists who have analyzed the plant compounds used in some of these preparations have found that several contain genuine psychoactive properties, things that elevate adrenaline, reduce pain sensitivity, and in some formulations, alter consciousness. But here is the thing that matters more than the pharmacology: what belief does to the body, in plain terms. Medical researchers have documented what happens when a person genuinely, deeply believes that something will change their physical state. Not vague hope, deep, culturally reinforced, community-witnessed belief. Cortisol, the stress hormone that impairs decision-making and motor function, measurably drops. Reaction time improves. Pain perception decreases. These are not imagined effects. They are real, measurable, physiological changes produced by belief. The Umuthi ritual was not a placebo in the dismissive sense. It was a delivery mechanism for the most powerful drug available to any human being: absolute certainty.
Every warrior who had received Umuthi knew, as surely as he knew anything, that his blood had been changed, that his ancestors were with him, that the enemy's protection was weakened. You cannot train against that level of psychological certainty. You can only hope that your own men have something equally deep. The British did not. The most famous and most misunderstood rule of the Ibutho: warriors could not marry, could not own cattle, could not start a family. Most historians describe this as a control mechanism, the king using what men want most to make sure they keep fighting. That analysis misses the deeper truth, and the deeper truth is far more interesting. In Zulu spiritual understanding, the sexual act was not just physical. It was understood as a transfer of vital energy, what they called amandla, from the individual and from the collective. The regiment was understood to carry a shared force, a collective power that accumulated over time. Sexual activity drained that force, not symbolically, literally, in the cosmological understanding of the world these men inhabited.
What we know with certainty is what this produced: a regiment of young men at peak biological drive, redirected year after year into the most physically demanding system on Earth. The intensity of focus this created has no modern equivalent. I know this is a lot to hold. We are going to bring all of this together in the next section, and the moment it clicks, you will understand Isandlwana in a way that no battle map or casualty figure can give you. We have now established what the Ibutho system took from a warrior: his name, his shoes, his sleep, his hunger, his individual identity, his civilian self. And we have established what it gave him in return: a collective identity, a transformed nervous system, a new relationship with pain and fear, the certainty of ancestral presence, and a spiritual world where courage was rewarded beyond death and cowardice was punished across generations. Now let us talk about what the warrior was still missing, and why its absence drove him like nothing else. Remember, in the Nguni world, being a full human being meant cattle, marriage, family, a homestead, the markers of adult existence. The warrior in the Ibutho had none of these. He was, in the social and spiritual accounting of his culture, incomplete. Not ashamed, not broken, unfinished. And every culture in the world treats the unfinished self differently from the shamed self. Shame is external, someone else judging you. Incompletion is internal, you yourself knowing that you are not yet what you are supposed to be. The Ibutho warrior could complete himself. The path was clear. The regiment had to wash its spears, ukuwasya imikonto, blood them in battle. Once that was done, once the regiment had proven itself, the king would grant permission to marry, the blood price for the right to become a full human being. Most accounts stop there, transaction understood. But look at this through the spiritual lens we have built, and something much more profound emerges. An unblooded warrior in Zulu cosmology existed in the same liminal space he had entered when his civilian self died in the Isigodi. He was between states, the dead civilian self, the not yet complete warrior self. The first kill was not an act of violence. It was an act of completion, of becoming, of crossing at last into full existence. Now, finally, we can understand what drove these men into battle. Not orders, not fear of punishment, not glory, not even loyalty to the king. The drive to stop being unfinished, the most powerful human motivation that exists. In plain terms, why this matters, modern psychology has a concept, the need for completion. Studies show that unfinished tasks, unresolved questions, incomplete identities create a persistent, unconscious pressure that shapes behavior more powerfully than almost any external motivator. The Ibutho system was a masterwork of creating this pressure and making battle the only legitimate release valve. A warrior fighting to complete his own existence is not fighting for something outside himself. He is fighting for the right to fully be. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting to exist. Those are not the same thing. And that asymmetry, that difference in what the two sides had at stake, is the most important military truth of the entire Anglo-Zulu War. January 22nd, 1879. Early morning. Lord Chelmsford, the British commander, has made a mistake. Convinced the main Zulu army is to the southeast, he has taken half his forces to find it, leaving his camp at Isandlwana defended by approximately 1,800 men. He is wrong. The main Zulu force, around 20,000 men, has been hiding in the Negwebni Valley, less than 8 miles away. For 2 days they have been completely still, no fires, no movement. 20,000 men, invisible. Think about that for a moment. 20,000 people, a small city, hidden in a valley, making no sound detectable by British scouts for 48 hours. Why this is physiologically remarkable. Human beings cannot be still. We shift, we cough, we move in our sleep. To keep a force of 20,000 men concealed across open terrain for 2 days requires a level of collective physical discipline that borders on the impossible. The Ibutho system had produced men for whom discomfort was a resting state, men who had trained the individual fidget, the individual impulse, the individual need out of their bodies. This was not obedience. This was the physical expression of years of biological rewiring. They were found by accident. A British patrol stumbled across the valley. The Zulu commanders had not planned to fight that day. The ritual calendar said it was inauspicious. But the right horn of the impi, young warriors already past the blood price, already complete, could not be held. They rose, and 20,000 men moved as one body. The British had the numbers to make the mathematics clear. With 1,800 rifles firing 12 rounds a minute, the volume of fire should have stopped any attacking force. Should have. The Zulu deployed the East Kwalane, the chest and horns formation. The chest of the impi walked directly into the fire, absorbing it, holding the British mind's attention. The horns, the left and right flanking regiments, moved around the outside. This formation requires men who can follow a plan while people around them are dying, who do not break when their brothers fall, who do not flinch when they are the ones absorbing the bullets, These were exactly those men. By early afternoon, it was over. More than 1,300 British and Allied soldiers were dead. Lord Chelmsford rode back to his camp at dusk and found silence where there had been a functioning military force that morning. What the survivors said. The most important historical documents from Isandlwana are not the official reports. They are the personal accounts, what individual soldiers wrote in letters and diaries about what they had witnessed. Because something comes through in the language of these accounts that no official record would allow.
Confusion. Not confusion about the battle. Confusion about what they had faced. Trooper Simons, one of the cavalry who escaped, wrote, "They came on as if they did not see us, as if we were not there. I have never seen men move through fire like that. It was not bravery. Bravery is when fear is overcome. These men had no fear to overcome." He did not know the neuroscience. He did not know the anthropology. He had not read Victor Turner on liminality or Donald Meichenbaum on stress inoculation. But he had seen the product of the system, and in one sentence, he identified the precise thing that made it different. Not the presence of extraordinary courage, the absence of the fear that courage normally has to defeat.
Historical record. Isandlwana. 22 January 1879. British casualties, 1,329 dead, including 52 officers, 806 British NCOs and men, and 471 Allied Natal Native contingent troops. It remains the single largest defeat of the British Army at the hands of an indigenous force in the entire history of British colonial warfare. 11 Victoria Crosses were awarded in the same 24-hour period for the defense of Rorke's Drift, which began hours later. The disproportion of honors coverage between the two engagements was noted by contemporary journalists and has been examined by historians ever since. At the very beginning, I told you this story was buried deliberately. We have arrived at the question of how and why. This is where the modern viewer's anger is earned. 11 Victoria Crosses were awarded for the defense of Rorke's Drift, the mission station held by 150 British soldiers on the same day as Isandlwana. The defense was genuine. The courage was real. But 11 Victoria Crosses in a single day is also the most Victoria Crosses ever awarded in a single engagement in the entire history of the award. The British government needed Rorke's Drift. It needed it desperately. Because Rorke's Drift was a story they could tell. British courage, British resilience, British men holding against impossible odds. Isandlwana was a story they could not afford to tell. Not because the British lost. Empires lose battles. History accepts military defeat. Isandlwana could not be told because of what explaining it truthfully would have required.
To explain Isandlwana fully, the Ibutho system, the spiritual architecture, the biological transformation, the collective fearlessness, would have forced the British public to face a single empire-ending idea. That the people they had classified as primitive had developed a method for building human beings that was, in the one dimension that matters on a battlefield at close quarters, superior to anything the most powerful empire in history could field. That idea was existentially dangerous to an empire built entirely on the premise of European superiority. So Rorke's Drift became the story. Michael Caine played it in a film nearly a century later, and Isandlwana became a tactical embarrassment rather than what it was. Proof that there was more than one way to make a human being.
Lord Chelmsford's internal inquiry.
classified, not published, concluded with a section on the nature of the Zulu warrior. Decades later, portions of it were declassified and examined by historians. The relevant passage is worth reading carefully. The Zulu warrior does not behave as a man who has decided to risk death. He behaves as a man for whom the question of whether to risk death has already been settled, perhaps years before the engagement. This is not courage as we understand it. It is the absence of the calculation that courage requires. I do not know how to train men to produce this. I am not certain it can be produced without producing something that is no longer entirely a man. A British general, writing in secret in 1879, describing with perfect precision a process he could not name, but clearly understood he had failed to match. He was not certain it could be produced, he wrote, without producing something that is no longer entirely a man. He meant that as a dismissal, as a way of making the Zulu warrior into something other, something outside the boundaries of normal humanity, so that the defeat felt less like a verdict on British civilization. But read those words again, and ask yourself whether his discomfort actually points to a question he was not willing to face. Every civilization in history has believed that its own model of a human being, its own understanding of what people are capable of, what they are afraid of, what they value, is the natural model, the correct model. The British believed it. Most cultures do. The Ibutho system is what happens when an entire culture commits, completely, across generations, to building a different model. And the result was not a monster. European observers who encountered Zulu warriors outside of battle, in diplomacy, in trade, in ordinary life, consistently noted something that surprised them. The warriors were calm, measured, emotionally regulated in ways that struck outsiders as unusual, even gracious. The capacity for violence was not who they were. It was a mode they could enter, and just as cleanly exit. That level of control is more unsettling to face than the violence itself, because it means the violence was a choice, not a compulsion. Lord Chelmsford wrote that he was not certain the Zulu system could produce men without producing something that was no longer entirely a man. He meant it as a way to close the door, to say, this is something alien, something other. I want to open that door instead. What is a man?
If this rewrote something for you, share it, because this story was suppressed for 150 years, and the only thing that changes that is people deciding it matters. Drop the question in the comments, the one I said I couldn't answer. What is a man? I want to read your answer. And the comments on the last video gave us 3 of our next 4 topics. So if there is another warrior culture, another suppressed history, another story the world has been keeping from itself, tell me, because that is what this channel is here to do.